Good afternoon. Welcome to the LifeScience Alley 2012 conference. Today's science, tomorrow's healthcare is our theme for this year. One of the reasons that we all gather here on this day is to try to meet one another and connect so that we know who we are and that we have the ability to introduce ourselves. So we'd like to provide you, rather, with the ability to introduce yourselves to each other. So for right now, we're going to pretend that we're in church, and we're going to ask you to take next minute or two and introduce yourself to the people at your table so that you all know who you are. So please take a minute, and I'll be right back. Okay, well, hopefully you've had a chance to meet everybody at your table. We'd like to begin our plenary session, our luncheon plenary session now. My name is Dale Wahlstrom. I am President and CEO of LifeScience Alley. I hope you've been able to make some valuable connections this morning already and to hear some thought-provoking discussions that you can take home with you. I would like to take this opportunity to extend a very special thanks to several of our partners, organizations like the Freeman, our exposition company, Maple Lane Media, our conference AV organization, Showcraft, who helped to design the exhibit hall in our space, the Start Group, who helped you all get registered this morning, and of course Thunheim, our marketing partner. And please join me in a round of applause for those groups. Okay, once again, I can't overstress this enough. I want to thank our premier conference partners, FedEx, Mayo Clinic, Greater MSP, and the University of Minnesota. And all of our sponsors and all of our exhibitors who are out that make this event possible. And I want to just pause for a moment here and just say, I want to repeat how important being part of the organization is, because when you come and you present and you are a sponsor and you put up your booths and share who you are and what you do with the community, it's more than just presenting yourself and your business to the community. It's about building the community. It's about building the strength and creating the web that keeps us all together. And just one small statistic that I want to share to kind of reemphasize that point. Last year, and again, we'll use the medical device example. In the last few years, since 2008, our country has lost somewhere around 5,000, 6,000 jobs in the area of medical device technology. Minnesota has gained about that number, a little bit less. And the reason for that is the strength of the fabric of our community. And it's you who are here that are allowing that to happen, and the fact that you take the time to come and get connected and stay connected. It builds a strong mechanism by which we can create wealth and growth for ourselves and for our companies and our people. So for those of you who are just joining us, please note that we have set up a Twitter hashtag for the conference. I believe it's up on the poster. We again encourage you to please share your insights and your experiences of the day. We want to hear about that, and we will put them across the screen. We'll be streaming them live periodically throughout the day. If you haven't already done so, please also take a moment to download Event Mobi, our free mobile conference app. It allows you to gain access to everything you need to know about the conference, exhibit hall, etc. The social networking process is always interesting. At this point in time, again, I want to reemphasize the important role that our legislators have played in helping to keep our industry strong and continue to work to grow that. So at this moment in time, we're going to have a short video clip by Senator Amy Klobuchar.
Hello to all my friends gathered at the LifeScience Alley Expo today. I think you know I'd much rather be there with you in person, but there's just a few things going on in Washington, like, for instance, trying to get that medical device tax stopped from taking effect. So we have a lot of things happening, so I'm honored to join you via video. I want to thank LifeScience Alley for your great work to strengthen our state's life science sector and for everything you're doing to put Minnesota on the map as a global leader in technology and innovation. It's been on the map for a long time, but we want to keep it there, and that's going to happen because of your hard work. I had the pleasure of seeing LifeScience Alley's CEO Dale Wahlstrom this week when he joined me in Washington for the launch of the new Medical Device Innovation Consortium. The consortium is a first-of-its-kind public-private partnership that brings businesses to the table with policymakers, academic leaders, and FDA scientists. The goal is to promote innovation by addressing the industry's top challenges, including the increasingly slow and complex approval process for medical devices at FDA. This issue is absolutely critical to Minnesota, where we're home to more than 400 medical device firms employing 35,000 people, and it's something I've been focused on in the Senate. I've introduced legislation last year to cut through some of the unnecessary red tape at the FDA, strengthening its least burdensome requirement and easing onerous conflict of interest rules. As you know, the legislation, known as MDUFA, was signed into law this summer as part of that larger bill to strengthen the FDA. But there's still much more work to do, and I'm continuing to work with the FDA and Minnesota's medical device community on ways to reduce the regulatory burden. We can't let up. We have to make sure that while the safety standards stay in place, that we have an efficient system that works not just for jobs, but also for patients. And the way it works for jobs and for patients is to make sure that we get things done, get them approved, get things moving at the FDA. I've also been working to address the most pressing issue facing your industry that I already mentioned, and that is the tax that's scheduled to take effect at the end of this month. One thing is clear, this tax is a roadblock to innovation. That's why I pushed so hard during the health care negotiations, along with then Senator Evan Bayh, to cut the tax in half and delay its implementation by 1 year. Well, we now have the tax going into effect, and there is much more work that needs to be done, and that's why we are continuing to push for a repeal of this tax. There is reasons to be optimistic. First, while the looming fiscal cliff presents many challenges, it also presents an opportunity to address the issue in the lame duck session. Second, with so many newly elected members about to join the Senate, we will continue to push and educate them, and your industry has been so much more involved in terms of educating people all over the country. When we started this, it was just pretty much Minnesota and Indiana and Massachusetts in terms of people who understood this issue. Now we're seeing senators from all over the country joining me in pushing to have this repealed, to have this delayed, and we're working every single day to do that. In the meantime, I'll continue to stand with you and urge my colleagues to join us in this important effort. I do want to thank Eric Paulson for his leadership in the House. We're all working on this together. On a broader level, I believe we should be doing more to promote life science innovation overall, not just in the medical device field, but in everything from pharmaceuticals to biofuels to agricultural biotech. So how do we do that? Well, we begin with our education system. We have to increase the emphasis on science, technology, engineering, and math. We have to better match the skills being taught in our classrooms with the skills needed in our workforce. This means things like having kids in high school start working on their technology degrees, their 1- and 2-year degrees. It means better process for commercializing university research to ensure more promising breakthroughs can actually get to the people who need them most. Stronger incentives for research and development, like an R&D tax credit that is clear and consistent, not stop and go. And finally, economic policies that bring us back to brass tacks. Everything from increasing exports to bringing down our debt in a balanced way with targeted cuts, but also with revenue. If we've learned anything from the economic turmoil of the last few years, it's that America can no longer afford to be a country that just churns money around on Wall Street. We need to be a country that thinks, that invents, that makes things, that exports to the world. Minnesota's life science industry is on the front lines, and I can't thank you enough for everything you do to promote science and progress in our state and in our country. Have a great time today, learn a lot, keep up the good work. Here's to you. Senate water, budget cuts. We'll get through the end of the year. Thank you.
Before I turn the podium over to Larry Casisto, I want to just make a comment. There are many of you in the audience today that have been part of the ongoing teleconference calls with our senators and our representatives who are truly in the front lines in D.C. trying to make this big change to help keep this industry strong in the United States. So we cannot thank you enough for doing that, because when you share your insights, you share your problems, you share your opportunities with them directly, it is an invaluable educational mechanism for them. And because of that, you have enabled them to be the leaders. Like Senator Klobuchar is the founder and chairperson of the Vice Caucus in the Senate, and Eric Paulson the same in the House. And they are doing a phenomenal job of representing you and making change for the whole industry. So with that, it's my great pleasure at this moment to introduce Dr. Larry Casisto. Larry is the Vice President of Education for LifeScience Alley. He's also the Chief Operations Officer for Alley Institute. And Alley Institute is the sponsor of this year's research poster session. So here's Larry.
Thank you, Dale. Thank you, Dale. LifeScience Alley is an international leader in sharing best practices in the largest state-based life sciences trade association in the United States. We represent nearly 700 member organizations of all sizes devoting themselves to research, development, and commercialization of the full breadth of life science and healthcare technology. The Alley Institute Student Research Poster Session highlights research that might well lead to commercial applications. Many of these projects are directed toward improvements in public health and healthcare. This year, we'd like to thank our sponsors, Evergreen Medical Technologies and Alley Institute, for their support of the poster session. The student poster session has been an important part of LifeScience Alley's conference since 2002. We invite academic researchers from across our state and region. This year, we have students and faculty here from Minnesota, Michigan, and Manitoba. The research projects on display showcase some of the best and brightest minds of our region. Evergreen and Alley Institute support these students, and Evergreen works with students just like you. Let's keep them here. Let's help them find a place in our region's life science industries. These students and their faculty advisors are looking to connect with your organization. They're here today to meet you and explain their work, to express their future goals, to learn and to network with you. Be sure to visit with them. A special thanks to the University of Minnesota's Medical Device Center Fellows who are reviewing all of the posters today. Their purpose is to evaluate the research, comment on its presentation, and to suggest ways to express the utility of the research, to transition from defending its integrity to promoting its value affecting public health and healthcare. Thank you, MDC Fellows, and thank you to all of the students and postdoctoral fellows presenting research today. It's now my pleasure to introduce Robin Sternberg at the Minnesota Department of Employment and Economic Development. Robin.
Thank you, Larry. Good afternoon. My name is Robin Sternberg from the Minnesota Department of Employment and Economic Development, or DEED. I'm honored to be here today to introduce the new technology showcase partner, Mayo Clinic. As an international leader in healthcare innovation and delivery, Mayo Clinic is an important economic driver in the state of Minnesota. Mayo Clinic not only provides care to our population, but also produces groundbreaking research and technologies with the potential to create jobs and improve lives in our state. Just a month ago, I accompanied Governor Dayton on a visit to Hormel Institute in Austin, Minnesota, to witness a celebration of a collaborative partnership between the University of Minnesota, the Hormel Institute, the Hormel Foundation, and Mayo Clinic. That event symbolized just one of the many ways Mayo Clinic is engaged with cutting-edge research that can produce significant economic benefits for our state. Minnesota has an economic legacy that we are all very proud of. We are all blessed to live and work in a state that values education, a strong work ethic, collaboration, inventiveness, and innovation. Our culture of excellence has created a diverse and resilient economy that we must work hard to protect, nurture, and promote. On behalf of the governor and the newly appointed commissioner, Katie Clark, we are more committed than ever to the important work of supporting job creation through our economic development work. We know that Mayo Clinic, LifeScience Alley, and many other organizations here today are critical partners in that work, and we look forward to the opportunity to work with you as we move these priorities forward. And now, I'd like to introduce Jim Rogers, who is chair of the Mayo Clinic Ventures.
Thank you, Robin. At Mayo Clinic, innovative technologies are a key component to providing more effective and value-added healthcare outcomes for our patients. Every day, our physicians and researchers contact my office with at least one new idea for us to consider. My office is dedicated to commercializing these ideas for the benefit of patients and Mayo Clinic. Mayo is proud to sponsor this year's New Technology Showcase, introduce some of the latest technologies to members of the life science and healthcare communities in attendance today. The New Technology Showcase highlights 10 companies with novel products and therapies, each of which has the ability to impact patients and improve healthcare delivery. All of their technologies are on display in the New Technology Showcase section in the exhibit hall. Congratulations to all this year's finalists. Please be sure to stop by and congratulate them and view their technologies. 3 of these companies will now provide a brief overview of their new technologies and respective market opportunities. We will move through these presentations quickly, so please seek out company representatives at their displays this afternoon if you have any questions for them. We will first hear from John Russell, President and CEO of Corventis, Inc. Presenting next will be Tad Ressemann, founder of Tellus Medical. And last but not least will be John Schellhorn, CEO of Montrose Medical. We will hear from all 3 in immediate succession. John, you're up.
Jim, thank you very much. And on behalf of all the employees at Corventis, a number of whom are here today, we're grateful for the honor of this recognition. And also thanks to Dale and to the entire LifeScience Alley group. Congratulations on really bringing together a fine meeting here that continues the rich tradition of medical innovation here in Minnesota, which we're very proud to be a part of. At Corventis, our fundamental aim is to apply wireless technologies to improving the diagnosis of cardiac disease and in the process, improving access to care and lowering costs. Those are the overall objectives. And it's a big problem to be pointed at. If you look at in the United States alone, cardiac arrhythmias and heart failure account for tens of millions of patients. And all too often, these patients go undiagnosed until an acute event occurs, which then results in hospitalization, which is very costly to the healthcare system and devastating for patients. In cardiac arrhythmias and heart failure alone, there are nearly 2 million hospitalizations a year. These conditions, in the case of atrial fibrillation, for example, can result in stroke if go undetected. And in the case of heart failure, it's such a devastating condition for the patient and for the cost of our healthcare system that Medicare, just starting about 9 weeks ago, implemented a new program, if you call it that, where hospitals, really hundreds of hospitals who have high rates of heart failure readmissions are having their reimbursement from Medicare cut, not just for heart failure, but for everything they do as a result of high heart failure readmissions. So it's a problem that's got a lot of laser beam focus in the healthcare community, and it's not a U.S. problem alone. Many of these numbers you can take and multiply outside the U.S. So what are we trying to improve upon? In the tools that are really available today for diagnosing patients and following patients outside the hospital, which is what we want to do to prevent the hospitalization, are at best cumbersome and very challenging for patients. In the case of heart failure, the standard of care is a weight scale, and knowing to step on a weight scale, sometimes an electronic weight scale, at the same time of day, every day. If you don't have an electronic version, write down your weights and get them to your doctor. And keep in mind that predominantly, these are very elderly patients, many times who are living alone or living with an elderly spouse. In the case of arrhythmias, the standard of care are very cumbersome multi-lead systems that require a patient to take them off every time they shower or exercise and remember how to put it back on exactly. So the end result really is a lack of patient compliance all too often, a short duration of wearing these things, and as a result, a relatively low diagnostic yield. So what we're trying to do is improve upon that dramatically using today's technology. The Corventis, the core of the system, is what we call the PICS. It's a Band-Aid device that's wireless. It self-activates on initiation with the skin. We send these to patients' homes, so they're simple enough for the patient to self-apply. And once on, they stay for a week and continuously record the patient's vital signs and prepare them for transmission wirelessly to their physician. The devices can be worn through a shower, so the wear is truly continuous. They have sophisticated algorithms on board as well for detecting when arrhythmias have occurred or other kinds of events have occurred, so those can be flagged and saved for the doctor as well. Here's what the overall system looks like, what it fits into. As I mentioned, the Band-Aid or the PICS is the core of the system, but in the patient's home, that transmits wirelessly to a cell phone-like device, which then uploads all the information to a secure cloud-based server where our certified cardiac technicians can ensure that the physician's not overwhelmed by volumes of data, but only gets a very concise report that has the data that's of interest to them in better managing their patient. And so the end result is a report that goes out to the physician that's had human quality overread to it and organization to it. Now, the core of the PICS technology, there's two versions of our platform. One is focused solely on arrhythmia management and measures ECGs, measures heart rate, is able to collect the duration and volume of atrial fibrillation burden for the patient, which is very important in managing these patients. And whenever there's an event, the algorithms are sophisticated enough to capture a 45-second real high-fidelity ECG, which is then available for the physician to view. In addition to that, if the patient feels that thing that brought them to the doctor in the first place, that palpitation or that symptom that they wondered whether they had a cardiac problem, they can self-initiate the storage of an ECG as well, which oftentimes is just as valuable to be able to rule out cardiac origin on symptoms. The broader version of the platform is called Avivo, which builds upon this core and adds important sensors for measuring fluid, respiration, activity, and posture, all of which can be very important for assessing the progression of heart failure patients and stratifying their risk, all in an effort really to keep them from getting worse and ending up with a costly hospitalization. These are the kinds of very concise, digested reports that go out to physicians during and after prescriptions. As you can see, it's not an overloaded data. It's what they need to see and what's helpful to see. And the fidelity of the ECGs, for those who have arrhythmia experience in the room, is just outstanding. Well, we've had a big year at Corventis. In the last 12 months, we've had a lot of validation for our system. It turns out that while this is a fairly simple concept, actually making it real is pretty hard to do. And we're very proud in the last year to have had validation from another number of outside sources for what we do and the accuracy of it. We had a couple of papers that were published in the IEEE Engineering and Medicine Biology Society meeting this year that documented over 5,000 devices had a 98% success and appropriate application by the patient. And keep in mind, these are elderly patients. The box is showing up on their door. So 98% of the time, they are by themselves opening this up and with the appropriate instructions in the box are self-applying and successfully getting started with the prescription. And then in the second paper, it documents over 900 consecutive patients and just how high a diagnostic yield we had. 40% of the patients were diagnosed with either significant bradycardia, which is a slow heartbeat, or atrial fibrillation. And the average wear time was 2 weeks, so clearly these patients are successful in getting a good duration of wear. Secondly, we had some very nice validation of our heart failure program in the peer-reviewed press. Both the Journal of Cardiac Failure and the Congestive Heart Failure Journal published full papers on two major studies we had done. One was FARM, which did a correlation, showed a very hard correlation of what we measure with impedance in our device and actual measured fluid changes in a patient. And the much larger one was the MUSIC study, which in a very large heart failure population showed a lot of promise for what we measure and its ability to risk stratify patients who are getting worse for heart failure and may end up with a costly hospital event. And then finally, another form of validation is the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office. We've been busy over the course of our history with intellectual property, and in the last 12 months we've had our 2 latest patents were issued. It brings to a total of 4, and many, many others in our both U.S. and international portfolio. And finally, and this is my last slide, I would say that for all of us, the most important form of validation is, does your system actually get used? Does it actually helping patients? That's really what we're all here for. And all of us at Corventis are very proud of the fact that in our short history, our system has proven to be a global system, and one that has helped patients in over 20 countries on 4 continents just in the last several years, improve not only the quality of cardiac care, but in many cases, in places where alternatives are not available, has helped improve the access to care. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, everyone. I want to thank LifeScience Alley for the honor of being able to present Tellus Medical to this community today. We founded Tellus Medical around the goal, really, of providing a in-office therapy for the ENT specialist to be able to treat their patients who are suffering from chronic sinus infections. Back in 2006, I started the company along with a colleague, Peter Keith, and Dr. Ted Truitt, who is a ENT specialist here in the state of Minnesota. And really, we focused on 3 stakeholders and meeting the needs of all 3 of those stakeholders. We felt if we could do that, we'd have a successful company and there would be successful patients treated. The first stakeholder being the patient, in providing a less invasive procedure that this patient would no longer have to go into the operating room to be treated, but could be treated in the physician's office. And then for the physician themselves to be able to have a procedure that they could stay in their office and do, and would have a durable effect for the patient as well as a very economical outcome for the physician as well. But then for the payers, the third, and we all know how important this is that they would be paying less to treat those patients over time. And we felt if we could meet the needs of all 3 of those major stakeholders that we would have a successful company. We built a team. We have strong leaders in all of our functional areas with a great track record of success. We have over 120 employees now since we started the company in 2006. And we augmented this with a really strong scientific advisory board almost from day one with the company. It's a mixture of academic as well as private practice physicians that have really helped us develop our technologies, as well as the clinical studies that we've used to test these technologies and prove that they work. Sinusitis is a big issue. It affects over 37 million people in the United States alone, and it accounts for 1 in 5 antibiotic prescriptions. And we know that antibiotic use is way overdone here in the United States. The common symptoms, many of you probably know, are heavy drainage, facial pressure and nasal congestion, as well as loss of sense of smell and fatigue. The market opportunity is significant. There's 1.6 million people that go to an ENT specialist every year in the United States with a form of chronic sinusitis. Of those patients, the more anterior sinuses are most often affected of the maxillary and the anterior ethmoids. And for our technologies, that represents about a $1.6 billion market opportunity. Traditionally, medical therapy has been used initially with these patients, going through several courses of antibiotics, steroids, nasal sprays, decongestants, and such. But really, the only alternative to that when that fails is endoscopic sinus surgery. The goal of that is to go in and remove the bony partitions that separate the nasal cavity from the sinuses and allow those sinuses to drain and ventilate better. Those limited treatment options, for many, medical therapy means a persistent use of antibiotics and nasal steroids, multiple trips to the urgent care and to their physician. And when that doesn't work, they end up into the operating room for a more extensive surgery, which has a very lengthy recovery time of 2 to 3 weeks. Tellus Medical has developed technologies that fill that void. We have a 20-minute procedure that can be done in the physician's clinic under local anesthesia with direct endoscopic visualization, and many of the patients go back to their normal activities that very same day. We have a family of devices that we've developed since we started the company in 2006, and we can treat just about any patient that would be a candidate for sinus surgery. We can treat them in the office with our technology. So office-based solution, it's very simple. Patient comes in, local anesthesia is applied, much like you would see in a minor dental procedure. And then rather than cutting out the bony partitions to gain better ventilation and flow out of the sinuses, a tiny balloon is advanced through the nostril to the sinus to be treated. It's dilated, the bone is remodeled along with sparing in the mucosa, very little bleeding, and you gain that drainage and ventilation that you're after. This technology has all been proved in numerous studies, including the Breathe 1 study. As you can see here, the validated symptom score was used. We saw the dramatic drop in patient symptom score in the first week, and it was sustained all the way through 2 years for this patient population. So the product works, the technology and the treatment works. How about the value proposition to the payers? Well, for a patient that would be normally taken into the operating room, either an ambulatory surgical center or a hospital outpatient department, you can reduce the overall healthcare cost almost 50% by taking that patient to the clinic and treating them with a balloon device. All at the same time as the physician reaps a value of 81% increase in what they normally would be paid for that procedure. And again, at the same time, it's reducing the healthcare costs. So in conclusion, have we hit our mark? We believe that we've hit all of the 3 major stakeholders' needs and has really positioned our company for strong growth currently as well as strong growth into the foreseeable future. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm John Schellhorn, and on behalf of all of the employees at Montrose Medical, I'd like to thank Dale and LifeScience Alley for the honor of being able to present to you today. Our company is focused on MRI-guided laser interstitial thermal therapy treatment for brain lesions, and in our case specifically brain tumors. This is one of only 2, as I understand, procedures in the world that's performed at an active MRI magnet. The company was actually founded in Winnipeg, Manitoba, and currently the headquarters, just this past September, were moved down here to Plymouth. We have 20 employees in each country right now. We're 510(k) cleared. We are commercial stage. We're on the market in the U.S. with 6 installations, and our NeuroBlade system is currently we're treating close to our 100th patient in the United States. Why brain tumors? It's a large and growing population of patients. It's a desperate disease. They are diseases that claim their victims, unfortunately, very soon after diagnosis in many cases. We have an opportunity, we believe, to treat many of these patients that right now are running out of options very quickly. We have an FDA-cleared system. We are demonstrating clinical safety. We have excellent reimbursement. And we are sending our patients home the next day from this treatment. We, in minimally invasive treatment, it's a controlled surgical laser ablation. It's actually being performed under live visualization in a magnet, in an MRI magnet. And the thermal ablation is, the effect of that ablation is being read, the thermography is being read live by the physician as he's working the laser. If you look at the system, it's an entire system. It includes a patient transport and head fixation system that allows the fixation of our mini frame to be accomplished. We have a kiosk at which the physician will actually perform the procedure in the MRI control room. And we have a series of consumables that are used in each procedure. Here you can see how the system is aligned in the MRI. The physician actually performs the procedure from the control room. The patient is in the MRI in the active magnet, and we have an equipment rack that's in one of the rooms outside of the MRI. This is what it looks like from the patient's perspective. Their head is fixated in our proprietary head fixation device. We also have a head coil that allows the stereotactic mini frame to be mounted in any position. So the whole value proposition is that we can get to any tumor anytime, and part of that is to be able to mount the mini frame to get very precise trajectories to the tumor itself. Probably the most important slide of the presentation is the one that shows from the physician's perspective what we're getting, and really the promise, I'll say the secret sauce of the system, which is by taking raw data from the MRI, we are able to translate the tomography that's being performed at the MRI into our software and actually give the physician lines of thermal progression. So he's actually seeing the cell death, the cancer death, occur real time, and he can actually sculpt the ablation right up to the margins as you would in traditional excision. This is occurring in 3 planes. It's actually a volumetric image that he's getting, 3D if you will. In clinical practice, through the first 85 patients, our system is being used for not only primary tumors, GBMs and gliomas, but metastatic tumors and even radiation necrosis and benign tumors. We've also treated epileptic lesions. So I'll say in clinical practice, the broad application of the technology is being realized. Here's a case of what is considered an inoperable brain tumor. This is a temporal lobe GBM. It's in the center of the brain, very deep. This is a patient that would have otherwise a grim outlook. You can see at the top in the upper right what the pre-neuroablate, what the tumor looks like. And then you can see 90 days and 180 days post that is a tumor that's has been ablated. This is really an excellent result, and this patient went on to do very well. Another GBM, a much larger one, a very ugly tumor, and you can see a great deal of edema around it in the upper right. Looking at it, and I believe this was post 90 days, this is a tumor that's well under control, and all the edema that creates a mass effect, and a lot of the symptomatology has been reduced, and this patient's doing very well as well. So looking at it compared to the current algorithm, which is conventional craniotomy with excision or stereotactic radiosurgery, gamma knife, for those of you, we have some real advantages, one of which is we can retreat the patients. And that's a very big deal for us. The other one is we can gain access to parts of the anatomy that are really off limits to conventional surgery, and we're realizing that real time right now. For the patient benefits, you can get craniotomy with excision-like results and go home the next day with very low pain scores. For the surgeons, they are really getting the effect of their procedure fed back to them live. So unlike any other procedure right now, when the physician's completed the procedure, he knows exactly what the result has been. It's gives them a lot of confidence they reached the margins of the anatomy. And for the hospital, of course, we're really reducing hospital stay quite dramatically. Thank you very much for your attention this afternoon. Thanks.
Thank you, and congratulations, New Technology Showcase presenters. We look forward to seeing how your novel approaches will improve patients' lives in the years ahead. My name is Dana Boyle, and I'm Vice President of Community Engagement at LifeScience Alley. It's now my distinct honor to introduce today's luncheon keynote speaker, Dr. Véronique Roger. Dr. Roger, who grew up in France and received her MD from the University of Paris, is a practicing physician and faculty member of the Mayo Clinic College of Medicine. A principal investigator of several NIH grants in the field of cardiovascular disease, she has completed 2 cardiology fellowships at Mayo and received her master's in public health from the University of Minnesota. Minnesota, by the way, has been her home for the past 25 years or more. In addition to chairing Mayo Clinic's Department of Health Sciences Research, Dr. Roger is the director of the Center for the Science of Healthcare Delivery, which was recently established to translate Mayo Clinic's exceptional model of healthcare to other health systems. The work at the center explores and analyzes how care is optimally delivered, how discrete healthcare interactions flow, and how costs are managed so that all of those areas can be improved, measured, and applied to healthcare outside of a Mayo Clinic context. What she and her colleagues are discovering is what Dr. Roger will address today in her talk, From Strategy to Execution, Think big, start small, act fast. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Véronique Roger.
Thank you very much, Dana. This is overly kind. And I'd like also to thank all the team at LifeScience Alley for giving me the opportunity and the honor of speaking with you today. As Dana pointed out, I came to Mayo Clinic as a practicing physician, and I stayed at Mayo Clinic because I'm a practicing physician. So the perspective that I will be sharing with you today is largely that of a provider in a big organization that is dedicated to addressing the challenges that healthcare faces today. So we're in the holiday season, so I thought I'd start by sharing with you what I have on my wish list, and maybe it's on yours as well. It's a nice looking car. It's red. It's probably fast. It's not too big. So that's what I would put, you know, again, on top of my wish list. Now, what if instead of looking at that, when I go to the dealership, I was presented with this? Still the same car, still red, still small. It has a fast engine, state-of-the-art technology, great tires, which are handy in Minnesota, and nice leather seats. But it's given to me that way. So that's the perspective that our patients have on the care that we deliver. And that's why, as an organization and as an individual, we're excited about addressing the challenges of healthcare today and going back from this fragmented, inefficient, non-synergistic model back to approaching healthcare with a holistic view. Now, if this is the patient's perspective, this fragmented, disjointed healthcare system, what do we face as providers? What we face are decreasing reimbursement for the same amount of work, increasing costs, increasing expensive regulation requirements. The presenter before me alluded to the 30-day reimbursement penalty, if you will, for individuals with heart failure that get readmitted. We live it every day. It's not only heart failure, it's myocardial infarction, pneumonia, and a lot of other diagnoses for which we get penalized if these individuals come back to the hospital. We're in the era of value-based purchasing, yes, but it's based on quality metrics and not outcomes, meaning that it's focusing more on process measures, meaning what gets done in terms of accomplishing and checking boxes, rather than do our patients do better at 30 or 60 or 90 days. And we're definitely in a field of consolidation, commoditization, and cutthroat competition among groups of providers. So how do we tackle that? The call to action comes from every angle of the healthcare field, from you, from us as providers, from patients, from payers, and certainly from academics as well. And you can't open a medical journal these days without finding such a call to action. I've selected to share this one for two reasons. One, because it was published in JAMA, which is arguably one of the most prominent healthcare journals currently in the world. And second, because it's coming from Peter Pronovost, who is a leading investigator and clinician that has really transformed the way we think about the quality of care in the healthcare field, particularly when it comes to central line infection. And in that piece, what Pronovost said is that if patients are to receive the full benefit of medical advances, meaning if the technology that we're embracing and sharing and networking about today will make its way to the patient bedside, we have to take the delivery of care as a research endeavor. We have to approach it with scientific rigor. We have to take it seriously and conduct research to improve population health. So this is what the Center for Science of Healthcare Delivery is all about. Now, how do we go about fixing healthcare? The goals have been articulated. These are quotes from Michael Porter, who's one of the leading scientists thinking about value. Articulating the key principles to address the challenges in the healthcare environment is to focus on value for patients, that the care should be centered in medical conditions, and the results be measured, which is obvious because if results are not measured, they cannot be managed to. Michael Porter makes this optimistic statement that value-driven care delivery will change medicine because it will enable us to pursue excellence, to collaborate as teams, as providers and healthcare professionals, and it will lead to new reimbursement model and fewer malpractice suits. Now this is very much a wish list as well. And the challenge as we look at this is not to agree on the key principles, which we all agree with, but it's to think about how can this be implemented. So when we start thinking about implementing value, the tool that's the most commonly used is the value equation, at least as a conceptual framework. And the value equation is quality divided by cost. So how do we define quality? We define it as outcomes rather than process measures, as I've mentioned, safety, and service, and cost is cost. So we're getting a little closer to a more concrete and manageable, if you will, definition of value. However, as was illustrated in the previous presentation, from which perspective are we assessing value? Is it from the perspective of the patient, from the perspective of the provider, or from that of the payer? And healthcare is a funny business if you start thinking about it, because those who receive the service or services are not the ones who are paying for it. And this triangle, obviously, is at the root of a lot of the challenges that we're facing today. So let's try to look at that a little bit deeper. How do we address those challenges? To address to operationalize the value equation, and in particular, when we think about the numerator, meaning safety, quality, and outcomes, and if we want to integrate the perspective of the provider and that of the patient, it's critically important that we bring multidisciplinary teams to bear in that discussion. And the range of disciplines is very broad, going from healthcare economics to clinical research to behavioral sciences, all of this overlaid on the provider environment. That's a new framework for most providers. And the first step is the recognition that we can't do it alone, and we need to call upon those disciplines in order to be effective. The Center for Science of Healthcare Delivery at Mayo Clinic was created in 2011 with the goal to create, evaluate, and implement high-value, patient-centered care delivery. So again, the focus is on value from a multifaceted perspective. We defined some objectives as improving our delivery systems to provide high-value and reliable care, increase our national leadership in value-driven care delivery, disseminate our knowledge, and in doing so, executing the institution's strategic and operating plan. And I want to pause here to explain to you why I'm sharing this last bullet with you. It's because the Center for Science of Healthcare Delivery and its objectives are not overlaid artificially on the institution's goals. And in fact, for the first time in the history of the Mayo Clinic, the goal of improving the delivery of care has been explicitly formulated in our institution's strategic and operating plan. And that's, again, a new departure for us, which explains how critical what we're trying to do is to the future of our organization. Now, to do that, we're guided by a strong legacy, and I'd like to spend a few minutes sharing that legacy with you, because I think it's important to explain where we feel we're positioned to go forward and embracing the multidisciplinary approach that's needed to change healthcare. This is 1866. William Morrill Mayo, who's a surgeon, founded the Mayo Clinic, and he kept a ledger that you have a picture of right now, where he collated all his operations, all that he was doing, and took some copious notes, and used these notes as a repository, if you will, of his knowledge as a surgeon. And on this particular page, the excerpt says, "Left open for further thought and research." So this is the Science of Healthcare Delivery of 1866. This is the reflective work on the practice of a physician with the goal of improving that practice. A little closer to us is Henry Plummer, who lived between 1874 and 1936. Henry Plummer was a physician who worked at Mayo Clinic, but he was also an engineer. And his engineering skills and training and expertise enabled him to make transformative innovations in the way care was delivered in the 1920s. For example, he designed a building that bears his name in Rochester, the Plumbers Building, which is represented on this cartoon, which is his cartoon, where he conceived and conceptualized the building around patient workflow and the patient movement across the processes of care. So if you start at the bottom of the building and go up along the arrows on the left-hand side of the slide, you can see that the patient is supposed to enter through the door, go all the way up to be seen by a physician in the examination room, and then work his or her way down through the various specialists that he or she might need to see for his care. And then towards the bottom of the building, if you will, he or she would get blood tests and x-rays, et cetera. The center column is the column where the providers reside, the physicians and the nurses, and the patients are on the side. So this was obviously very carefully thought through and engineered to maximize the efficiency of the care delivery model. This was 1920, and it was in one building. In order to care for patients, not only do you need to have them be able to work their ways, if you will, through various venues of care, but you also need to have a record that follows that patient. And the single record system was a major contribution of Dr. Plummer to avoid the fragmentation of care along the metaphor of the car in multiple pieces that I used to get us started. And Dr. Plummer thought about the fact that one single medical record was needed to ensure that continuity of care so that all the physicians involved in the care would be looking at the same piece of information all in one place. So therefore, you needed a system. As patients were traveling across the medical center and going to other buildings as the medical center was growing to carry those records from point A to point B. And that's where the tube system was invented. You have a picture of that here. It's no longer used now that we use electronic health record, but until recently it was still in use to transport x-rays and medical records. Once the records have been used, they need to be filed, and there's a central filing place here. And one other thing that Dr. Plummer invented is a filing system that also is associated with the concept of indexing. So not only do you file individual records, but there was an indexing system that was devised to enable retrieving the diseases according to certain categories. So for example, if a surgeon was interested in reviewing all the brain tumor surgeries that he or she had performed, you could call this indexing system on the basis of the diagnosis and retrieve all patients that had this diagnosis. So it's going from the ledger of Dr. Mayo in 1866 to a system which is really medical informatics in its infancy, which is a data filing and data retrieval system. Today, we're no longer on papers, we're no longer on index cards, we're dealing with terabytes of information. The medical record room that is pictured on that slide here has been replaced by the Center for the Science of Healthcare Delivery. This is where our space is, and it's a little bit of a sign of history here, where we are now conducting this line of research. And we're dealing with much more complexity in healthcare, as we all know, including the data deluge, if you will, that was illustrated in some of the previous presentations. So to keep the legacy alive, we need to innovate, which poses for healthcare providers a big challenge, which is, can we, institution and individuals, invest in the future and embrace change? And can we do that as we're facing the increasing pressure of regulatory bodies, including the penalties on reimbursement, such as the readmission story that we talked about before? It's kind of like refueling a 747 in flight. We need to respond to the regulations, and we need to innovate at the same time. So that brings us to Project Mars, which was based on the recognition at Mayo Clinic that we needed to do things differently. So differently that we had to think about outpatient practice as if we were setting it up on planet Mars. It was sort of thinking, well, we have the legacy of Dr. Plummer, we have our commitment to efficiency, our commitment to patient care, our embracing of engineering techniques in the delivery of care. Let's forget about that for a minute. Let's go to a completely different environment and redesign the way we do care. In other words, how would Dr. Plummer do this today if he was back on Earth and helping us do that? So with the concept of completely renovating care, Project Mars was started with the following goals: to improve patient and physician experience while maintaining or enhancing quality, to reduce cost by at least 30%, and we are committed to a fast dissemination of these models with the goal of deploying them in more than 40% of the outpatient practice by 2014, which is a very aggressive timeline, and particularly aggressive in the environment of a healthcare provider where things don't move always with the speed that we'd like it to move. We applied, again, an engineering and design methodology or innovation methodology to do that, which required for practitioners like myself to be really working shoulder to shoulder with designers and engineers to think about how we could do this in a different way. So the engineers and the designers started by scanning and framing our environment, looking at how we work today, which parenthetically is still uses a lot of the components that Dr. Plummer implemented in 1920, and seeing if those components were still accurate and responding to the needs of patients and the needs of providers today. The designers and engineers started then researching and experimenting other approaches, making a synthesis of those, and then prototyping them with the goal of deploying what worked in a prototype environment. So what could this look like? Our designers first had to get us used to a different vocabulary than a provider is used. So they were talking to us about those experimental families around, and organized around the concept that we were trying to address and improve. So for example, there was an experimental family designed around smart space. One of the big issues for providers today is the clerical burden that the electronic health environment, if anything, has increased rather than decreasing. So the construct here was, can we automatically complete the clinical information and enter it in the electronic health record automatically before the patient gets here, before the provider sees the patient, so that all the necessary information is available to the provider at the time that he or she sees the patient. The goal was to decrease appointment length, and in doing so, increase patient and provider satisfaction. And you will see this as a recurrent theme as we envision a lot of some of these other experimental families, which is the commitment to do that with the goal of improving the experience of the patient. So can we improve the experience of the patient and improve efficiency at the same time? Another experimental family was around customized education. Education is a key part of delivering care, as you all know, whether it's to learn to patients to take their medications, live with certain devices, input some information from their providers in their daily lives, and output it back to the providers. And education, therefore, is a key part of delivering care, but it can be somewhat repetitious, it's time-consuming, and one can ask the question, what is the most efficient way to deliver this to a given patient? And so again, the experimental family focusing on customized education had the goal of providing education to the patient at the right time in a customized way to optimize patient satisfaction, and in doing so, decrease appointment length and maximize physician efficiency. The information before the visit has also had to be collected in a way that would be efficient and relying on electronic information. And the goal for that was not only to improve the patient satisfaction, but also key for us in our referral practice to have the patient see the right doctor the first time. Why is that important for us? Well, because we're a large referral practice with patients coming to us from other institutions typically or other providers, and they come with a lot of medical records that need to be processed before the patient gets to us so that we can then assign them the provider that is going to best respond to the patient's needs. And then finally, I just want to introduce the concept of group visits that Project Mars experimented with, which is the concept that if patients have a disease and groups of patients have the same disease, when we're thinking about delivering the education material that needs to be delivered, could we do that in a group? And this is somewhat revolutionary in thinking because patient-provider privacy, if you will, and confidentiality is at the crux of how we deliver care. But could we think about preserving that and still delivering education in a group setting? And in doing that, would there be also the unintended benefit of perhaps building communities of patients, whereby patients would not only benefit from the education that the provider will give, but will educate themselves, and again, build a community that would enable them to stay in contact with one another. So what does this look like? I mean, this is a schematic rendition, cartoon of the lobby of our Gonda building, for those of you who may have been to Rochester. So if we implement some of these components of Project Mars, what does this look like? So here, for example, you have a patient from Missouri who's on her way to her appointment. Her information has been entered online at her home, and she had a pre-visit Skype session with her provider before leaving her own hometown. This pre-visit information step, conducted electronically, will lead to, in our estimation, about a 10% efficiency gain on the provider side and on the patient side as well. here, sitting in one of the couches in the lobby of the Ghana building, there's a patient who's watching a customized education video about his condition on his iTablet. So it's no longer occurring in the doctor's office. The doctor and the patient have agreed that this line of treatment was going to be recommended. There's a need to educate and inform the patient. The patient can then watch this video at his or her own time, wherever he wants, and then come back and ask educated questions to the physician or care provider. This step would lead, in our estimate, to a gain of 5% efficiency in the way we conduct our patient practice. Here we have another patient who's getting an alert on his tablet that a virtual consultation with a specialist has been scheduled, which means that there's a specialist who will be reviewing all the information available in the medical record of the patient in order to render an opinion about what the next logical step of care is. That gain of efficiency, in our estimation, is about 15%. That's what we call the virtual micro-consultations. With all the information that has been efficiently entered in the record, can we help continue to have the patient progress to the chain of care without necessarily having yet another face-to-face provider interaction? So you can see here that as you sort of engage in each of these steps to improve the efficiency of care, you can add up between the virtual micro-consultation, the smart space, the customized education, and the pre-visit information up to an estimated about 40% or so gain in efficiency in the outpatient practice. And in this model, which is centered around the patient and the timely processing of the information of the patient by the provider and communication by providers to patient, the patient satisfaction is improved as well. Now, what is interesting about Project Mars is not only the concept of really rethinking the way we design the outpatient practice, but is the fact that these innovations, which are a multiplicity of steps in the care processes, are scalable. So as you start with this innovation in the outpatient practice, you can then extend it to managing patients before they come to see their provider, entering information in an electronic way, completing the episode of care in a more seamless fashion than before, and importantly, following those patients forward as they complete their visit or complete their evaluation, perhaps virtually after they've gone back home. So let me just show you some examples of application of these technologies to other settings. What about stroke care? So stroke care is a challenging issue because stroke is a very serious health event, of course. It's a devastating complication that leads to mortality and disability. We now have effective treatments to treat stroke, which are thrombolytic therapy, or so-called clot busters, and these have to be given very early, such that we think about the treatment of stroke as time is brain, if you will. The caveat here is that these medications are medication with severe side effects and potentially dangerous unless the diagnosis is certain. And the diagnosis, in a lot of cases of stroke, can only be established through the expertise of a neurologist. So you immediately have a challenge is that you have a time constraint on one side and the need to see a specialist on the other side, and how do you make the two work together? The telestroke program was designed at Mayo Clinic to respond to this challenge, relying on e-technology or digital video cameras in the internet to provide live, real-time consultations between the neurologist and the patient. And the concept here is that if we can't bring the patient to the neurologist in a timely fashion, let's bring the neurologist to the patient in a timely fashion. So the technology is based on digital imaging and internet, and the neurologist is sitting here at his computer looking on the left-hand side at a room where the patient is in an emergency room, and on the right-hand side at a brain scan. This technology is obviously portable. It can happen at work, of course, but also when you're traveling, meaning that now we can be on call all the time. And it can happen anywhere, at home or any other location. So that's what it looks like from a provider standpoint, so it's very nimble and it's very efficient. From the patient standpoint, this is what it looks like. So the patient is in a local emergency room, talking directly face-to-face to one of our neurologists through a video camera. So the interaction between the patient and the neurologist is real-time, not mediated, not delayed, or not mediated by other providers. And the neurologist on the camera is able to ask the patient about his or her symptoms, how he feels, how long this has been in place, and making sure that the decision to proceed with the clot buster therapy is based on sound clinical diagnoses. And of course, the imaging or the brain scans can be reviewed at the same time through the same means. And here you have a CT scan here that shows evidence, and that's the black spot on the left-hand side of an old stroke in a patient who's presenting with symptoms. So the Mayo Clinic Stroke Program has expanded. It was started in our hub in Arizona, in Phoenix, and it has expanded to the entire region in Arizona and even to Missouri. And just to give you an example of the scope of work, if you will, that this enables, in 2007, 40% only of Arizona residents, 40% of Arizona residents lacked access to stroke expertise in some rural areas. Since the Telescope program was implemented, about 1,000 consultations and 1,000 lives have been touched by this program. The program is now going national, including our emergency room in Rochester and our facility in Jacksonville, Florida. Another vignette about what this technology that was sort of developed and thought through for Project Mars can be used is to apply to the ICU environment. Can we create the IICU, or the Intelligent Intensive Care Unit, in 2012? So this is a typical ICU setting, and most of you are very familiar with that. It's an area where patients that are critically ill are taken care of. They're hooked up to all sorts of machines, and these machines have a myriad of data points that are available for providers to review and make decisions about patient care. Because these patients are the most critically ill patients that we can conceptualize, it is vital that this data be integrated in a very timely fashion to make decisions about their care. So this is what this looks like for us when we look at those things. These are the screens that we're looking at in the electronic health record environment. And in terms of what this represents is about, for one critically ill patient a day, about 1,350 or so data points. So it's intuitive to all of us that this has the potential of overwhelming the cognitive capacity of most providers, and that the potential for error is in fact increased by the electronic health record. You get this sort of data paralysis that you're not so sure what to do with that information. Not desirable for the provider, and certainly not desirable for these critically ill patients. So the Intelligent ICU, or AWARE dashboard, has as a goal to identify and present only relevant information as discrete packages to facilitate decision making. It collects the data automatically, so all the inputs from these devices, monitoring devices, et cetera, is collected automatically, and it's displayed in real time but reorganized, as I will show you. And how it's reorganized is using the expertise of physicians who work day in and day out in the ICU and saying, yeah, this is what I need most in this situation, or this is what I need less in this situation. And it is context specific, so it will be organized and customized differently for patients who present with a heart attack, and a patient who presents with sepsis, for example. And it relies on dynamic rules to extract the data from the electronic medical record. So this is how the information would flow. On the left-hand side of the slide, you have all this unstructured data, the sort of data paralysis or data overload, if you will, that I showed you on the other slide. And then it gets processed by the system in little packages, as we call them, organized by organ status, history, examination, treatment, response to treatment, and enables clinicians to make decisions about diagnosis and patient care. So at the 20th century, the big revolution in coronary care units were, which is represented on the left side of the slide, was one data point, which was typically the heart rate and sometimes the blood pressure, like you see here. 21st century, with the AWARE system and in an intelligent ICU framework, this is what it looks like. Going from left to right on the slide, you have data of increasing complexity, but are presented to the providers in an organized way with the hemodynamic and physiological parameters in the red boxes, sort of more on the left, and then going towards the right, sort of more systems organized diagnoses that enable physicians to take care of patients. This is currently in place in our ICUs in Rochester. And of course, the concept is that you can go from a single ICU to several ICUs, and you can then generate the concept of an ICU dashboard, which then brings us to the concept of an electronic ICU, where the intensive care physician could be sitting 2,000 miles away, looking at a dashboard like this, and helping local providers manage critically ill patients, again, without having to move the patient to the provider or having a plethora of providers for these, fortunately, relatively rare situations. Another vignette is our approach to blood transfusion. And as we all know, of course, blood transfusions improve outcomes, but they have to be used in the right time in the right patient for the right indication. And the standardization of blood transfusion is an elusive sort of approach in healthcare, because typically residents and fellows and providers tend to do and respond to hemoglobin levels or other situations in a way that's somewhat haphazard. Within cardiac surgery, we piloted the use of standardized approaches and protocol to reduce the necessary transfusion. In doing so, we reduced those transfusions by almost 50%, which saved about $15 million. So that's an example of standardizing care to improve efficiency and saving cost. Finally, I'd like to leave you with two vignettes of companies that were created as a result of this engineering thinking, if you will, in the delivery of care. The first one is AssureRx, which responded to an unmet need to improve drug management in neuropsychiatric disorders, which, as we all know, is a very prevalent condition. Patients, and all of us, have different family of enzymes that are falling under the rubric, if you will, of the cytochrome P450 that have very different genetic profiles. These different genetic profiles will make us process drugs in a very different way from patient to patient, which means that when you give one drug, in this case a neuropsychiatric drug, to a patient, because these drugs are metabolized by enzymes under the cytochrome P450 family, if they're metabolized differently, with the same dose, you're going to have very, very different actions. Dr. David Mrazek, who was the chair of psychiatry at the time in Mayo Clinic, recognized this unmet need, was passionate about genetics, and built an algorithm enabling to guide the selection of drug based on the patient's genetic profile. So the patient can be anywhere in the United States or in the world. Genetic material is collected via a buccal swab, and the patient is genotyped for the variants in the cytochrome P450. And then the clinician will get a report that not only will provide the report about the genetic variants, but more importantly, will counsel about how to use drugs. And you have that represented on the right part of the slide with the green section of the report, the yellow section, and the red, where in the green section it says to the physician, you can use the drug as you see fit, you can use the normal dose, there's no problem. In yellow, you need to be somewhat careful, and in red, you don't want to use it as recommended because this patient has a different genetic profile. So this company now has been developed since 2008. It's expanding very quickly and has been extremely successful, expanding now into the treatment of ADHD as well as opiates and most likely many other drugs. Physician Software System is another company that was developed based on Mayo technology, which responds to the need to manage anemia in dialysis patients. The patients who undergo dialysis oftentimes could be anemic before they undergo dialysis, and it exacerbates anemia for a variety of technological reasons that I don't want to detail. But the typical course clinically of patients who are on dialysis is that their red blood cells or hemoglobin will fluctuate, like represented on the sort of red roller coaster in the right part of the slide here. This is not a good situation because it creates symptoms for patients, complications, and compromises basically the stability of their care. So what do physicians do? They use a drug which is called erythropoietin, which is a very expensive drug, to boost the patient's capability of creating red blood cells. But it's very expensive, and it enhances, if you will, those big cycles because the patient will be low on the as far as his hemoglobin, will get the injection, the hemoglobin will skyrocket and will go up and down like this for back and forth. So the software was designed to respond to this need of smoothing out the hemoglobin curve by titrating the dose of the erythropoietin drug to the patient's need. And the input is how the patient reacted to the drug before and enabled to then design what the right drug would be for the patient. This is important financially in the dialysis world because of the bundled payment approach. And by doing that, we also improve safety and manage costs. So a company was created in 2011. FDA approval for that is set up for 2013, and the plan would be then to make this available for dialysis patients nationwide. So in conclusion, again, I would renew my deep appreciation for the opportunity of sharing these thoughts with you today. I hope that I've conveyed the impression that in the think big world of healthcare challenges, there are some solutions that can be devised, that these solutions have to be patient-centric and provider-generated and have the potential also to reduce cost. And finally, that these are definitely conducive to entrepreneurial partnerships. Thank you very much for your attention.